Good evening to all of you. I'll just share my screen. Just give me a couple of minutes. Am I audible to all?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
So this is my favorite topic. So I hope I managed to do justice to the 30 minutes because I can go on and on. It's 25 years of work on this lesions. So papillary lesions of the breast. So this is the way I'm going to cover this 30-minute discussion. First is people don't understand, since there are many non-pathologists in the audience. I would like to make them understand the basic concepts of what do you mean by papillary. Then I'll first go to the spectrum and then go to the diagnostic methods, because if you don't understand what I'm talking about, then the diagnostic method doesn't make any sense, and a little bit of pitfalls in core biopsy and in FNAC. So papillary tumors of the breast are basically a heterogeneous group of neoplasms with overlapping clinical manifestation, and they're bonded together by one common architectural pattern, and that's the papillary pattern. Now, typically a papilla goes within the duct, so papillary tumor should always be intraductal. But the way today WHO speaks a different language, and in the invasive spectrum we have certain not so papillary lesions like solid papillary carcinoma and encapsulated papillary carcinoma included in that category. Just to make is the screen visible to all? Anyway,
yes,
so
yes,
okay,
yes.
you see this is the normal acinar or ductal structure. You can see there is a epithelial lining which is usually 8-18 positive and a myoepithelial lining which is 5-6 positive. Now imagine if you draw a core of cells inside, that is a true papillae. And you can see this is my diagram. It shows you that this is a core drawn inside, and this core will now grow and form a papillary tumor. Now in this core, if you pull this inside, you will have the myoepithelium sitting at the base and the epithelial cells lining the luminal aspect, and around all this is a cystic structure, because as it pulls through, the rest of the duct will form a cystic structure, because the secretions that come from this papillae will fill this entire cyst and it will dilate and you'll have a cyst. Now micropapillary actually is not true papillary at all, because what happens is, now you see this triangular cell. Imagine if it reverts itself. That means this apex, instead of going to the lumen, it goes outside. You can see that it's gone outside. What will happen is the secretions that are normally secreted in the lumen will now get secreted in the outside of the structure. So what you get is actually a retraction artifact and these little floret-like structures which are called as micropapillae. Now there is a big difference between these two entities. This micropapillary is actually, because the cell is actually inverting and destroying the stroma, this invariably is invasive, whereas papillary structures which are growing within the duct, within the cyst, will always have their best behavior. Now the spectrum of papillary tumors includes benign, in situ and malignant. In the benign, of course, you have the papillomas which can be central or peripheral. The papillomas don't stay still. They undergo epithelial proliferations, which can either be termed as complex papilloma with atypical ductal hyperplasia. Sometimes this ADH or atypical ductal hyperplasia becomes sufficient enough to call it as DCIs. Mind you, ADH is already low-grade DCIs. Only when it is within the papilloma, we don't use the term DCIs very frequently, and there are criteria to call something as DCIs within papilloma. You can have a DCIS which is purely papillary. You can have an encapsulated papillary carcinoma and a solid papillary carcinoma intraductal. Now these two actually are invasive tumors, but because they have an intraductal, very indolent growth pattern, they are put into the category of an in situ papillary tumor. Malignant tumor, the invasive solid papillary carcinoma and papillary carcinoma NOS go into this category. To make this concepts understanding, simplify these concepts, as I told you, this is the duct, and remember this finger-like fronds growing in. So if they grow in and they carry the myoepithelial layer, the red is the myoepithelial layer. If they carry the myoepithelial layer with it, this is a very benign lesion. This is a papilloma. It may undergo a lot of epithelial hyperplasia changes, but it still remains an papilloma. A quick clue will be to look at the lining of the papilloma. If that lining is benign and it has myoepithelial cells, whatever is inside is not invasive, at least it may be DCIS at the most. Here is a structure which is very much like this, but This structure does not, in the papillary fronts lack the myoepithelial cells, whereas you may see some myoepithelial at the periphery. Now, this is a cystic structure and the architecture is papillary, so it is classified as a papillary tumor. This is what is an encapsulated papillary carcinoma or solid papillary carcinoma, and I'll describe these. Now, invasive papillary carcinoma, NOS, you have these ductal-like structures with papillary front. All of them lack myoepithelial cells. So essentially, they're destroying the stroma, they're invading, but they have this papillary, sometimes the papillae fuse and form a cribriform pattern. So myoepithelial cells seen, always papilloma, not seen could be different variants of papillary carcinoma. How do we distinguish between benign and malignant lesions? The basic concept is that, as I told you earlier, that the cyst lining is always benign in any papilloma with whatever kind of epithelial hypoplasia. Whereas the cyst lining is always malignant in a papillary carcinoma. Intracystic papillary or an encapsulated papillary carcinoma, the invasive is a different cup of tea. Now, the fronts in a benign papilloma are very huge, as opposed to the invasive malignant lesions where it is micropapillary. A third very important thing is that the stalk is attached to only one place in a benign lesion, whereas you will have the tumor arising from multiple places in a malignant lesion. So this is just a gist of it. It's sometimes not as simple. So let's start with papilloma first. So you have the typical papilloma that comes to the OPD with serosanguinous nipple discharge. It's very well identified, grossly also very well seen. That's something that you will diagnose on a clinically and on a undergoes a microdecectomy. The one that is notorious is this peripheral papillomas, because these are multiple, these are occult, and they usually come as mammographic lesions like calcifications. They are unidentifiable and sometimes they are very small. And these are the ones that often have ADH or DCIs in the adjacent breast, and these are the ones that become a problem in diagnosis. Now, here is a papilloma. You can see that it's a nice cystic wall. The wall is very benign, and you see the broad fronts. You see they're very plump, juicy fronts. It's floating in its space. Within the fronts, you have some epithelial proliferation, but with this kind of a spaced out architecture, all these fronts, they fit into the piece like a pieces of a jigsaw puzzle into one big mass, and you have only one stalk, and that makes this as a benign papilloma. But unfortunately, papillomas do not continue staying the same way as I showed you. Sometimes those structures that you see, they get stuck to the wall due to the hemorrhage and different things. There is epithelial hypoplasia, and this epithelium infiltrates the adjacent fibrous stroma in the form of tubules. And people who are not used to papillary lesions will call these tubules as invasive carcinoma. The clue is that how much ever atypical there is epithelium in the tubules, there's always a myoepithelial lining, and you have to put liberally markers like smooth muscle heavy chain complex and P63 to demonstrate myoepithelial lesions. This is the biggest problem in papillomas, that people don't know the spectrum of secondary changes and they get overdiagnosed as carcinoma. Now here is a tumor, nice cystic wall. I think this is the place of attachment, broad fronts fitting into each other like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But there's a problem as opposed to the previous papilloma. This is epithelial rich. There's a lot of proliferation within the stalks of this papilloma. It is a little more complex than the previous papilloma. You have some amount of atypia, but you can see this is the luminal epithelium and these little adenoses like growth pattern within the stalk. It's still a papilloma. There's abundant myoepithelial. This is a P63, which is a nuclear stain, and you can see it highlights the number of myoepithelial cells. Mind you, P63 is reduced in the areas of epithelial proliferation, but it's nevertheless there all along the lesion. So even if it looks horrendous, you probably control yourself and you call it a papilloma with epithelial hypoplasia. Now, when you're dealing with a little more atypical epithelial hypoplasia in a papilloma, we take a help of immunohistochemistry. The three things that we normally, all pathologists can easily do is do an ER. Remember, in the benign lesions, the ER is very low. As it becomes low grade or borderline or middle level in situ, the ER becomes very strong. Again, in high grade papillary lesion, it disappears, but in the low grade, which is the normal papillary lesion, it becomes very strong and diffuse. The basal cytokeratin, as you remember that I showed you two layers. So the basal cytokeratin CK56 is always present in abundance in the benign lesions, and sometimes it is even seen in the malignant papillomas. But in the low-grade lesions, which are a problem, it will be lost, and that is how we take help in diagnosis. Cyclin D1 again is not expressed in benign. As you grow towards higher grade of malignancy, it is expressed. So this is how we use these three stains to distinguish between benign and malignant if there is a problem. Now, if you have a report of a complex papilloma with atypical ductal hyperplasia, what do? It's very difficult because not many studies have addressed. There are two studies. The other one I could not get the full text, but this particular study, which was done way back in 1996, they found out that such patients are prone to develop DCIS or complex papillomas recurrent on the same side, but never an invasive carcinoma on the same breast, but in the opposite breast they may develop. So they're basically precursor lesions. They are basically little more ominous than a usual papilloma. So the obvious answer to the question is that you have to conservatively manage. Now here is a papilloma. Now this, compared to the single duct and a huge lesion within, this has now become multiple. Why? Because there's a lot of epithelial proliferation. Here I can't make out where it is arising from because it is a tortuous duct and it has been cut at multiple layers. Now the epithelium here, you can see it's solid. So there is epithelial hypoplasia. Now when I look at the hypar, I see the lining is okay. The lining is not the worry, but inside it focally, I see malignant looking cells. I see nuclear atypia, I see mitosis, I see architecture which is like DCIS. So this becomes now a papilloma with DCIS. In this particular patient, it was definitely very easy to diagnose because the criteria is 0.3 centimeter of the papilloma at least should have this DCIS to call it papilloma with DCIS. So ADH and DCIS are the same. Only ADH is a smaller lesion and DCIS, low grade DCIS. Usually these are low to intermediate grade DCIS. They're very strong ER, but the clue is that when you get such a lesion, always look for in situ carcinoma in the adjacent breast. Now here is another case. She had a mucinous carcinoma on one side. On the other side, you have this very well-defined lump. This is the bilateral mammogram. And you see this has that echogenicity of a cystic lesion. When you excise this, exactly if you remember the mammographic picture, a big cyst with a whole mass of papillary structures just plugged in. I can't make out where it is arising from. It's just solidified. In fact, I can't even see a cyst lining because the lesion does not normally carry a very well-defined cyst lining. As you remember, if I say these papillae are not broad, they are small papillae. You go to the next structure, it will be more easy. They are micropapillae. They're atypical. There is mitosis. This is a sonographic picture of the same patient. And you can see that this is an intracystic lesion, which is malignant. So the next thing is to do a myepithelial marker. If you do a myepithelial marker, you realize that there's no myepithelial cells in the cyst wall. This is the adjacent breast that has myepithelial cells. So this is a circumscribed cystic lesion that lacks myepithelial cells but looks very intraductal or in situ. This is exactly what is an encapsulated or an intracystic papillary carcinoma. The story, however, does not end here. And this is another case of encapsulated papillary carcinoma, where at the periphery you get invasive carcinoma. Now the whole behavior of encapsulated papillary carcinoma is determined by the presence of this invasive cancer. And you don't have, so this encapsulated papillary is treated like DCIS of the nuclear grade that you have, whereas if you don't have the invasive tumor, but if you have the invasive tumor, you grade and treat the patient according to the component of invasive cancer. So there are very few studies because it's not a very common entity. So basically it's an invasive carcinoma that behaves like a DCIS, but it is often accompanied by an invasive tumor, and the entire trump card is based on the presence of that invasive tumor. My student Aarti did her thesis just last year, and you can see that only when there is invasion, an event occurred. EPC without invasion had absolutely 100%, almost 98% survival. So that's even the invasive ones are very good behaving. You see 94% survival. Now here is a lesion. This is a lesion you will always see in women more than 65 years of age. Again, now all those tumors that I showed you previously had a very single cyst. As opposed to that, here you have a ductal kind of configuration. You have this solid nests of cells which are intraductal. So they are basically looking like DCIs. and it's all over. This is a 75-year-old lady with 6 centimeter mass. Now, if you look at this lesion, it is obviously a DCIS, but when you throw in a P63, you don't find any myoepithelial cells. So it's very similar to your encapsulated papillary carcinoma. The ER is diffuse and strongly positive. And this is an intraductal variant of solid papillary carcinoma. And if I had to throw in a chromogranin, it often would be positive. So they show neuroendocrine differentiation, and they're always in women above 70 years of age. They have an exceptional behavior, almost 98 to 100% survival. Now, there is a spectrum of this solid papillary carcinoma. I already showed you the intraductal variant. Now, because you please understand that solid papillary intraductal is also invasive, only that because it is forming an intraductal growth pattern, it has an extremely indolent behavior. So when it acquires mutations, it starts producing these invasiveness. And once that invasiveness starts, then it becomes the invasiveness, they determine the prognosis. Once the invasion starts, so parallel to it, does the presence of nuisance start. And what was an intraductal now becomes an invasive tumor, very much like what you get in DCIS. But please remember that the myoepithelial cells were never present, and this tumor is basically an invasive cancer. Now this lesion, now let's go to the mucinous variant of this solid papillary carcinoma, sorry. This is what we call as type B solid papillary carcinoma. I will not go into the details of this because this is a spectrum in itself. This is actually part of the spectrum of mucinous cancer. So please understand, from intraductal to invasive to mucinous, that's the spectrum solid variant of papillary undergoes. To tell you just in a nutshell, the two papillary tumors which require immunohistochemistry and differential is a complex papilloma with epithelial hyperplasia, encapsulated papillary carcinoma, and solid papillary carcinoma intraductal variant. These three can look like one another. And of course, there's a benign papilloma that I have not included. And so you need to use your myoepithelial markers liberally. Now here is a patient. This patient was scheduled for mastectomy because somebody had called this as a papilloma with DCIS. Now, the problem was that patient didn't want any conservation. She was an older site thing. So this, you see, this is obviously a papilloma. And this is the area that was called as DCIS. Now, if you look for the pathologists in the audience, you'll realize the lining of the cyst is very benign. There is definitely atypia, but there is no mitosis. So this atypia this is the problem with papillary lesion, that atypia is natural to this lesion. You have a lot of apocrine cells and you have these large, bizarre looking cells, but there is no mitosis or necrosis. And this is the clue that whatever atypia you're seeing is not really omnious. This was called DCIS, but and look at the myoepithelial marker, abundant presence of myoepithelial cells. We do the luminal and the myoepithelial markers, and you see that the 5-6 is abundantly present within this lesion. That means that myoepithelial cells are part of this lesion. So you cannot, even if there is atypia, you cannot call this malignant. So we called it as complex papilloma with ADH. And of course, this is the common problem that I face every day. Now, giving the spectrum, now let's look at how do you go about diagnosing something as papillary. I'm not going to talk about micropectocectomy because the same spectrum will be covered. What happens if you hit a papillary tumor on core biopsy or FNAC, and do we do frozen sections in papillary tumors? Now, cytology is not the premium most important relevant method for diagnosis, because as high as 50% of them, which are called as papillomas on cytology, turn out to be malignant. So you must excise or have an histological diagnosis. They are very important. On cytology, they often call as indeterminate because benign lesions with atypia are called malignant, and malignant lesions are so low grade, they are called as benign. So that's the reason papillary tumors are a big pitfall on FNAC. In a core biopsy, the same thing happens. Of course, it's better than an FNAC. You have an underdiagnosis of malignancy in around 20% of the cases. Remember, there's always one step upgrading. So if you have a papilloma, may be upgraded to ADH, and papilloma with ADH may be upgraded to DCIS. A papilloma with DCIS may be upgraded to IDC in the excision specimen. But most important thing is to realize what is the clinical presentation of the patient. If these are symptomatic mass lesions and they have a higher BIRATS, then that's the cases that will upgrade. Not all papillomas upgrade. Papillomas which are diagnosed suppose I give a report of papilloma very confidently on a core biopsy, and their small radiology is concurrent, then you don't have to excise them. But any kind of atypia or epithelial hypoplasia, if I see, those are the lesions that need to be excised. Here is the cytology, and as I said, this is now we don't do cytology of papillary anymore. This is an older data, and you can see that many times papillomas are missed because of the cystic fluid. Many times atypia was called as carcinoma. On the other hand, in 11% of papillary carcinoma, one called carcinoma, they were called atypical, and in 26% the diagnosis was inconclusive. Just to show you, this was a papillary tumor called as carcinoma because of the degenerative atypia on cytology. Coming to the core biopsy, this is TMH data of last 2 years. You can see if I call something papilloma, it invariably turns out to be papilloma. The moment I call something as complex papilloma with atypical ductal hyperplasia, those are the ones that are worrisome, because out of 23, 18 continued to be that, but 6 of them had associated DCIS within the papilloma or outside the papilloma. One got converted to invasive breast carcinoma. If I call something as carcinoma on core, they remain carcinoma on core. And papillary neoplasms, at least in our hands, they're usually papillomas. So complex papillomas, many of the pathologists, see, all of us that report on core biopsy in Tata are specialists. So that's why our concordance rate is very high. Mind you, this may not be the same in smaller centers. So just to show you why this problem occurs. Now imagine if you have a cyst with a papillary tumor. If you do an FNAC, then it hits only the fluid. You will end up calling it as a fibrocystic change. If you do an FNAC or core and take only the atypical area, you will overcall a papilloma as DCIS. If you do a core biopsy and you may miss the same thing, you may miss a DCIS in the same lesion. If you have an invasive tumor associated with a complex papilloma or a papillary carcinoma, you obviously, if you don't target that, you're not going to get it. So these are the reasons why you have errors in a core biopsy of a papillary tumor. Another issue is that papillomas, especially the peripheral ones, are associated with multiple lesions in the breast. Like you have complex papilloma with ADH, you have unusual papilloma, sitting somewhere there will be either an intraductal or an invasive carcinoma. So where your core biopsy goes, according to that, you will have a diagnosis. And this is not the pathologist's fault, but this is the lesion's fault, if I may say so. Now, just to give you some examples, now here is a nice lesion, very compact. Remember, the more compact something is, the more benign it is. Very compact papillary tumor, apocrine metaplasia. This is what I wanted to show you, that the ER is heterogeneous in a benign lesion. It is not diffusely positive because some cells are myoepithelial, some cells are apocrine, and they don't always show you the ER. Abundant myoepithelial cells, heterogeneous ER, easily we can make a diagnosis of papilloma. You can even observe if the patient wishes further. On the other hand, here is a papillary lesion, a little more epithelial proliferation. You can see it's more monotonous. It's not as heterogeneous as the previous one. This is where I worry, but then I see that the base of the pores are all myopithelial rich. So whatever this is a complex papilloma with epithelial hyperplasia. So that's, we can easily call it. Now here is a lesion, you have a core biopsy, and what you see is that this is very neat and tidy intraductal proliferations with papillae. You see a myopithelial cells are abundantly present in the wall of this lesion. Cytologically, it's frankly malignant. So I call it a ductal carcinoma in situ, and thankfully the excision biopsy is also the same. Here is another papillary neoplasm. Now this, as opposed to all the things that you see, please understand the problem with the diagnosis, the coarse fragment in a core biopsy. So we often don't get nice intact tumors. And if you see, there is this what we call as polarization, monomorphism of cells, atypia. The atypia is not overwhelming, but it is monomorphic. And that tells me that this is malignant. I put in a ER, look at how strong the ER is. And look at the SMHC. You don't have a single basal lamina. It is fragmented. That tells me that this is doing something to the stroma. It's probably invading. And this is your P63, which is absent inside the lesion. This was an encapsulated papillary carcinoma. Now, here is another lesion. Now, this lesion, I was worrying because it didn't have myopithelial cells. So I said this is a complex papillary lesion and it may be with atypia and it requires excision biopsy. And to my lo and behold, what happened was this was the lesion. The papillary lesion had actually collapsed and there was a frank invasive tumor sitting next to that papillary lesion. So this time and again, this is of course one case, but once in a while this can occur, and this may confuse the treating personnel. Now, frozen section in papillary is contraindicated because they are frail and they're prone to freezing artifacts. So once you freeze a papillary tumor, in the paraffin or the final report, it shows so many artifacts that it becomes difficult for us without special stains or immunostains. Now, one of the important things is that your pathologist anyway is not going to give you a firm diagnosis unless he or she has great experience. But we do end up doing frozen section on unsuspected papillary lesions, and these are the ones that often carry an ominous significance, and they often have an in situ or an invasive component. So it's not that we don't do, but the peripheral papillomas or papillary lesions often come to us for freezing, and they may not be difficult to freeze also. But unless you have experience, you cannot give a report of a complicated lesions, papillary lesions on frozen section. So to conclude, understanding the spectrum of papillary tumors makes us understand a pathologist better and manage these tumors better. Remember that you have to have a high degree of suspicions for the spectrum. Use liberal IHC for an accurate diagnosis. My mood feeling is that they are such good tumors that instead of being heroic about it, it's better to be cautious about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Anuja. It was a wonderful talk. I must say all the audience would be really appreciating it. But I would say the large amount of information was there. So probably I will have to go to this talk many times to really understand everything in detail. And luckily we are sort of creating a recording of this webinar, which we would like to make available on YouTube so that we can go back to it. As I said, if there are any audience questions, I would like them that people post them on the chat box, and we'll take them at the end of the session. So right now, without wasting any further time, I would like to invite the next speaker, Dr. Smriti Hari, as we all know, Professor of Radiodiagnosis at AIIMS New Delhi. So Dr. Smriti, over to you.
So much, Dr. Arun. Dr. Arun was my senior in AIIMS, and I'm very glad to be here at his invitation. So I will just share my screen. Right. So I'm here to talk about the role of imaging in diagnosis and management in the papillary lesions of the breast. So let me straight away start with the imaging findings of papillary lesions. They are myriad imaging features because it's a group of very heterogeneous lesions, as we saw in the previous lecture. And most common presentation is that they are solid circumscribed masses, and which are usually retroareolar in location. And as you can see on color Doppler, they are pretty vascular. So this is the commonest presentation which is seen and well seen on ultrasound. Then you could have a cyst with mural nodules. So this is mural nodules, and it could go on to become more complex with more of solid component and more sinister looking appearances. Sometimes you don't get findings on mammography or ultrasound, and the patient has pathological nipple discharge. So in these cases, MRI is helpful, as in this case, with a normal ultrasound and mammogram, but you see enhancing lesion on the contrast enhanced MRI, and there were retroareolar dilated ducts, which were of course seen on ultrasound, but the mass could not be picked up. There was one, sorry, okay. So out of these findings, I am just putting these findings together. This is the intraductal mass on ultrasound. This is the circumscribed mass. This is a cyst with mural nodules, and this is a lesion on MRI. It's these two findings, intraductal mass and cyst with nodules where you can think of papillary lesions on imaging. Otherwise, these are pretty non-specific, and you would not be really thinking of papillary lesions only at imaging. And what is the importance of this is, yeah, this is the other finding which is common, a single dilated duct which may be seen on the mammogram, and on the ultrasound you see an intraductal mass with vascularity. So I try to divide the imaging findings into two types. One where you can suspect papillary lesions, and the others where you are not suspecting papillary lesions. So this is a patient with a palpable mass, and there is no nipple discharge, so we are not suspecting papillary lesions. So when you see such a mass, you give it the BI-RADS category, and which would be BI-RADS 4B, looking at this slightly irregular margin in this lady, and so the next step would be core needle biopsy. On the other hand, when you have a lady with unilateral serous discharge and you're also getting an intraductal mass, you know that you're dealing with a papillary pathology, and then the next step could be tailored. So you could do a core needle biopsy, you could do straight away a vacuum assisted removal, or you could straight away go to a duct excision, right? So now what are the pros and cons of these methods? Let's go to that. So after we've done a core needle biopsy, the possible histopath results are basically, I have simplified them, though the pathologist has the luxury of really going into the details and seeing so many types of papillary lesions. But for the radiologist, let's call it that it is going to be either a benign papilloma with the atypia, or it is DCIS, or it's a carcinoma. So things are very simple with these three categories. Here, there is no doubt that when you get a histopath result like this, they have to be excised. What about the benign papilloma? That is the one which causes most of the management difficulty for the surgeon. So I'm now going to talk about the benign papilloma. So this management, once it has been diagnosed as benign with core needle biopsy, is very controversial because the upgrade rates have been reported from 0 to 33% in the literature. So that means it is not safe to follow up these lesions if we could have such high upgrade rates. So the challenges in sampling papillary lesions, they have been beautifully explained by Dr. Sheth. So just recapitulating, it's the heterogeneity which leads to a high risk of sampling error. In the cystic lesions, once the fluid drains out after the first core, visibility of the lesion, the solid component is markedly reduced, so the targeting becomes more or less blind. And you need adequate amount of sample for the pathologist to be able to see the normal myoepithelial layer. So the quantity of the tissue should be large. And of course, fragmentation, they are very friable lesions, and presence of sclerosis, they hinder the diagnostic interpretation. So that, and then we also need to know which are the features which predict upgrade to malignancy, even in the benign papillomas on core needle biopsy. So if there is a discordance between imaging and pathology results, patient is older than 50 years, the lesion size is bigger than 1 centimeter, the lesions are peripherally situated at a distance of more than 3 centimeters from the nipple, and the higher BI-RADS category was assigned on imaging, meaning that there was a higher suspicion of malignancy on the imaging studies. So when we have gone through the previous discussion, we can come to one conclusion that probably upgrade rate can be reduced, and sampling error can be reduced with larger tissue sample. So for that comes into the picture the vacuum assisted breast biopsy, and which allows us to take a large amount of tissue using vacuum, and you have to insert the probe only once. So these are the advantages of vacuum assisted biopsy over core needle. So large contiguous tissue samples, I would say there is no limit to the amount of tissue take out with VAB. In fact, you can excise the whole abnormality which is seen on the ultrasound image. And even the targeting, you don't need to be very accurate because vacuum is very powerful and it is going to assist you. So all these features result into decreased false negatives, decreased underestimation, and you don't need a rebiopsy. So this is how VAB equipment is. This is the console which generates the vacuum, and this is the vacuum generator. This is the console with all the controls, and this is the gun that we use, which is thicker. It ranges from 8 gauge to 12 gauge, as opposed to the core needle biopsy, which is 14 gauge. So here is a very short video just to show that the vacuum assisted biopsy is not much different from a routine core needle biopsy. The only difference is that you have a thicker needle, larger cores, and you don't need to remove the needle. You can take multiple cores with the same insertion. So simply you put the needle posterior to the lesion, because if you put it in the middle or anteriorly, there will be a lot of shadowing on the ring artifacts from the thick needle and the holes in the trocar. So you need to put your needle. It's a very amateur video made by my students. So where I'm showing them the notch where the cutting is happening. So this is a very simple procedure, outpatient procedure. You don't need to admit the patient. It is pretty much the same like the core needle biopsy. So now coming back to the patient in which we did not suspect a papilloma and a papillary lesion, and did a core biopsy, and the result was papilloma without atypia, and she's a 40-year-old lady, not very keen on surgery. So we offered the option of vacuum assisted excision, and herein you can see that the trocar is cutting through the lesion, and we are basically removing all that is seen on the image, and later on the hematoma is also sucked out, and a clip is to be placed. So whenever you are removing the entire lesion, you must put a clip, because you don't know whether an upgrade is going to happen or whether a patient may need further surgery. So for the purpose of marking that site, you need to put a metallic clip. So for this, final histopath was a benign papilloma without atypia, and you can see this was the lesion. This is post-VAB. There is no residual lesion remaining, and she has been on follow-up on ultrasound for last 3 years, and we have not seen a recurrence. So we have done a number of cases like this, and have had good results, but of course you need to follow them up. So this is another lady with who had bloody discharge from the left nipple for 8 months, and you can see a tiny little lesion in the retroareolar area on the left side, which I have zoomed for our advantage here, and which is here on the CC view. And on the ultrasound, high resolution ultrasound is very, very good for picking papillary lesions in the retroareolar area. Pickup will definitely improve, and put very little pressure, because if you put too much pressure, the superficial ducts might just collapse and you miss the lesion. So very little pressure has to be applied, and radial imaging should be done. And herein you can see a lesion within this associated with this duct, which is hardly dilated. and there was color flow. So in this case, we were suspecting a papillary lesion. So instead of doing a core needle biopsy, we took the option of straight away doing a vacuum assisted removal. And that is what we did. This is the thick needle of the vacuum assisted biopsy gun, and we have placed it posterior to the lesion, and we removed the entire lesion. You can see that. And then we put in a clip and we took a mammogram. So this is the small residual hematoma. You can see that even after an entire removal, there is not much bleeding because vacuum is used to suck out the bleeding and flush the biopsy site. And there is a small clip in there which can be seen right here. So now the purpose why the clip is put and why it is so essential. The histopath was a complete surprise. We got a neuroendocrine tumor, that tiny thing with vascularity was a breast CA. And we had all these markers positive for neuroendocrine differentiation. And so it was, of course, decided to do a complete surgery. However, and the hook wire was used on ultrasound to mark the clip, and a surgical excision was performed, which revealed that there was no residual tumor. So that means the vacuum assisted removal had been quite successful and complete. So I have shown you two types of cases. One, where after vacuum assisted removal, you did not need to do any further surgery. Only what you do is follow up when you get a benign papilloma report. And since the amount of tissue you've given is adequate, almost nearly you try to excise the whole lesion, you can be comfortable that the sampling error is not likely there, but you still follow up these patients for at least 5 years. Initially at 6 months, and then you can make it a yearly follow-up. So I thought whether this same thing is being taken up in the literature, and I came across this very nice article from a Korean group, and which has been published in Radiology last year in September, and they have exactly targeted the benign breast papillomas without atypia, and then tried to compare the outcome of surgical excision versus ultrasound guided VAB, and there was a very small subset which they decided to just follow up and did not do anything, neither removal with the VAB or excision. So they have finally reported on 500 benign papillomas, and out of which 206 underwent surgical excision, 233 underwent vacuum assisted removal. So they found that the upgrade rate was not different in the surgical excision versus the VAB group. And none of the patients who were only on follow-up underwent upgrade later on follow-up. That is, and the follow-up is more than 2 years. So, and secondly, for the recurrence, there was a low rate of recurrence or after ultrasound guided vacuum assisted removal, 6 out of 166 patients, and no upgrade upon recurrence at ultrasound guided vacuum assisted removal. So means whatever the recurrence was in these 6 patients was also benign. It was not an upgraded recurrence. And the event free rate was same in the surgical excision as well as the vacuum assisted removal. So I would say the take home message is that when papillary lesion is suspected on imaging, ultrasound guided VAB is a good method for sampling, and the aim should be to go for complete removal. And unsuspected papillary lesions without atypia on core needle biopsy can also be offered vacuum assisted excision when the high-risk factors are not there, and those high-risk factors would be a large size, the age more than 50 years, any other high-risk factors, or if it's a very high grade, high BI-RADS category, or most importantly, if there is a discordance between radiology and pathology. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Smriti. Nice and compact. The message I think we get is we need an excellent pathologist and an excellent radiologist to really take care of the problems that we are going to face whenever we have these tricky breast lesions. So I think BC and such associations are doing a lot of great work in disseminating this expertise, and we are having good radiology and pathology support at our setup, and I think in most of the setups which are focusing on breast oncology. So now we will go straight forward to the panel discussion. We have taken 2 or 3 cases. So Dr. Vaishali Zambre, who's a senior consultant and focuses on breast surgery in Max Vaishali, is going to moderate the panel discussion. And our panelists are from the surgical side, Dr. Vedant Kabra, Dr. Sinu, and Dr. Anupama. And then we have Dr. Ritu Verma, Dr. Indu Bansal, and Dr. Ruchika Goyal. Dr. Gopal Sharma, who was supposed to represent medical oncology, unfortunately, because the number is full, so he is not able to join in, but he sent a message that you can say that the role of medical oncology is somewhat limited when it comes to papillary lesions. But if we'll see, if we get an opening, we'll try to get him in. So Dr. Vaishali, please start.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And I once again welcome all the panelists as well as thank Dr. Tanuja and Dr. Smriti. I'm now trying to share my screen. Can you all now see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have actually had excellent, discussions about the pathological aspect of papillary lesions and the radiology role of imaging by Dr. Tanuja and Dr. Smriti. I'm sure the cases are going to be just the discussion is going to be just a repetition of what we have already heard, but I'm sure that is going to be very helpful for the people who have actually joined later in the course of this seminar. So to begin with, I would like to share my first case. She is a 68-year-old postmenopausal lady who presented to us with painless progressive lump in the left breast of 2 months duration. She did not have any other symptoms, and there was no family history of any cancer. So clinically, she was found to have symmetrical breasts. Right breast and axilla was actually normal. On the left side, we could feel a 2 into 2 centimeter firm lump at 10 o'clock position. You can see the clinical picture. It was situated 2 centimeter away from the edge of the areola, and left axilla was actually unremarkable clinically. Her breast size was 36C. She had actually come with a mammography picture, which is the films were actually presented to us at the clinical examination. The report was actually ACR-C mixed fatty and glandular parenchyma, and with an evidence of dense, oval, well-defined, smooth marginated lesion in the upper inner quadrant. It was reported as BI-RADS 0. When we looked at the pictures, we could find another lesion which was actually situated in the upper part, and it was isodense. It was not as dense as the main index lesion, which was palpable. This lesion was clinically not palpable. She also had an ultrasound picture. Now here I would like to ask Dr. Ritu Verma her impression on the mammography. Considering the patient's age and the clinical presentation, what she feels about, or what would she tell us about the mammography?
Ma'am, this is a conventional bilateral breast mammogram, both MLO and CC view, and we can see an extremely high density mass lesion in the lower and in the inner quadrant of the left breast. The mass is really high density, which is not like that of a typical cyst, though the margins are very, very well circumscribed. The age of the lady is 68 years. The lesion is new onset, just 2 months duration. So I would like to assess it by one more modality. So preferably one ultrasound to look at this lesion. And then the additional cystic kind of lesion, isodense lesion that we are seeing in outer quadrant. And now looking at this ultrasound image, this is a solid lesion having well circumscribed margins at most of the aspects. And in one of the sides, I can see slightly angular margins here. So a new onset 68 year, definitely a BI-RADS 4B. And there is some moderate suspicion of malignancy here. And we would like to go ahead with further diagnosis and going for a core biopsy.
Right. So and now you can see this is the ultrasound picture, which is from our hospital, and you can see the margins, the irregularity at certain points more clearly than the previous ultrasound. And obviously, yes, as Dr. Ritu has clearly pointed out, she was actually advised a core needle biopsy. Ultrasound guided core needle biopsy was carried out, and this is what has been reported. It was reported as carcinoma with solid papillary growth pattern. And this was her immunohistochemistry profile. Here I would like to ask Dr. Ruchika, although Dr. Tanuja has already very nicely elaborated on the different, reporting of papillary lesions, but Dr. Ruchika, once again, I would like to ask you about, can you, put light on this diagnosis, carcinoma with solid papillary growth pattern, and from the surgeon's perspective, what are we likely to expect at the excision specimen? Can you just put some light on this?
So here in this core biopsy, in this case, what we are seeing is a proliferation of cells. So it's not very clear in this magnification, but it is a solid proliferation of cells with these very delicate fibrovascular cores. You don't have those thick fibrovascular cores which you see in typical benign lesions.
Correct.
Now here from this image per se, I can't say that there is a delineation from a duct. So whether it is in situ or invasive is difficult to say only on seeing, just keeping this image in mind.
Okay.
But definitely it is a malignant lesion. It is a malignant papillary carcinoma. Whether it is in situ or invasive cannot be commented on this core.
Okay.
So malignant papillary carcinoma. So the surgeon needs to now.
Right. So, but
Vaishali, can I speak some few minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Stop
Yes.
in between. Is Ruchika? Is it okay if I speak?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect. We'd love to hear you.
So two things. If you look at the ultrasound, and if you remember the ultrasound that I showed you of encapsulated papillary carcinoma, it's quite similar to what you have shown. So this is the typical appearance of an encapsulated papillary carcinoma. So basically what happens is that this is a tumor which does not have. So one important message is to do a myoepithelial marker. It does not matter whether you will never get a cyst wall in a core biopsy. So you do a myoepithelial marker, and you see that between the junction of you always have papillae, right? I can't show you with because of this, but nevertheless you look at whether the base of the papillae there are myoepithelial cells. So if there are myoepithelial cells, whatever is inside it is ADH or DCIS. It is not invasive. But if there is no myoepithelial cell at all, then you're dealing with an invasive tumor of limited potential or widely invasive potential. So that does not matter. It's an invasive tumor. It is either encapsulated papillary or an invasive solid papillary carcinoma. So what I would do.
But ma'am,
tell me.
No, ma'am, you continue then I'll.
So I would also do a chromogranin. I don't remember the age. I was looking for the age, but I missed the age.
68, ma'am. 68.
68.
Perfect. So this could be a solid papillary intraductal. So I'll also do a chromogranin. If the chromogranin is positive, then you have a carcinoma diagnosis. This is a carcinoma, I don't doubt it. But it will be important to say the extent of invasiveness, because sometimes when you have a 7 centimeter lesion and all, people are in a hurry to give chemotherapy also. So the important thing is to do myoepithelial markers, chromogranin. If chromogranin is positive, this is a solid papillary carcinoma. Then depending on the solid papillary, the myoepithelial will be lost. So you just call it fragments of solid papillary carcinoma. Rediscuss with your surgeon and radiologist, and then take a call if it's single lesion or if it looks invasive. this is a single lesion. I suspect that this is a, sort of a, this can be excised. There is no invasive associated with it. This is like an intracystic encapsulated tumor.
Right, but are we?
One thing I just wanted to add to what Dr. Tanuja ma'am is saying, I agree with her. So we also as a routine do put in a panel of a CK56, a ER and
Correct.
a synapto or chromo.
Correct.
One thing ma'am, why I'm just calling it short of labeling it as a in situ or invasive is encapsulated. If you're not seeing a delineation and if there is no myoepithelium, your invasive and EPC would show a similar. I mean, both will show loss of myoepithelial cells.
Right. I agree with you, but you have a regular.
So just being a little conservative on the core.
I agree. I agree. We have to be conservative, but from the looks of the radiology, maybe
Yeah,
it will
it's
be a little
looking
wiser
like
that
a EPC. Yes, I agree with you, ma'am.
Right, ma'am, actually considering the core needle biopsy report, you have already actually told us about, there could be changes in the actually excision specimen and a core needle biopsy. So what all a surgeon should expect from this core needle biopsy report? What should be your message to a surgeon as to, what should, whether it is invasive tumor or, I mean, are we likely to expect any nodal
I
metastasis?
think-
What can you add anything further to this?
So let me just go back again.
Yeah,
Encapsulated papillary carcinoma biologically is an invasive tumor. It does not have myoepithelial cells, but because it's confined within a cystic wall,
right,
it is treated like DCIs. Am I clear that it is invasive? There will be no myoepithelial cell.
okay.
Same thing, solid papillary intraductal will also not have myoepithelial cells. But again, it is confined in an area. It will behave in the form of a DCIS.
Okay.
So this is one of these two entities. Am I clear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think myoepithelial is lacking, but it is one of these two, in which case I would suggest wide excision and just a sentinel node biopsy. There's nothing more required because the malignancy, I think that part should be okay. Though I don't have a higher power, but I think this is what it is.
And is it possible to give a grade to this so that it?
Correct. So nuclear grade is very important. If the
Yeah.
nuclear grade is high, then to expect an invasive or an ominous feature is higher.
Right, because that is what actually helps us to decide
Absolutely.
about the treatment plan, the surgical plan. So I'm now coming to the surgeons on the panel. I would like to ask Dr. Vedant, what, considering the the imaging finding and the core needle biopsy report, what would you be thinking about? What would be your surgical plan, or what further do you need to do?
So there are two things. One, there is another lesion which is seen in the outer quadrant, which is a
Correct.
small one.
Yeah.
But in the chat, it was answered that this is possibly a simple cyst, so we can ignore that.
Right.
Also, this is an ACR grade C,
Yeah.
so possibly MRI may also be needed. If
Correct.
this is the solitary lesion, then I would go, as Dr. Tanuja also suggested, with a breast conservation and sentinel node biopsy.
Right. So let me ask Dr. Seenu, sir, what is your actually take on MRI? What will be your advice to this lady? Whether she would you do MRI for this lady, as Dr. Vedant has suggested? What will be your opinion about the need of MRI in this situation?
Yeah, see, basically it all depends on what the patient wants, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if the patient wants a breast conservation surgery, then yes, what Vedant said, I think we should go ahead and do an MRI, because the breast doesn't seem to be so very well delineated on mammogram.
Correct.
But if she wants a mastectomy straight away, then no, probably not.
Right. So we are likely to expect either some non-mass-like enhancement along with the the lesion which is palpable, so that we can take a decision about whether to go for conservation or not. So I'll now put up the MRI films and ask Dr. Ritu again to take us through the MRI. This is Dr. Ritu. Can you see the films?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, I can see. So here is the T2 weighted sagittal image. So that's the diffusion, and another T2 weighted axial image. We can see there is a definite capsule all around this mass. there is very minimal breast edema around it, and there is very subtle architectural distortion along the superior aspect. The lesion is kind of intermediate to hypointense on T2 images, but there is very diffuse and strong diffusion restriction. So that's a lesion with a edema around, but a preserved, we can see this hypointense capsule all around the lesion. And there is, on this image at least, the invasive component is not expected out here.
There is this other image as well.
So here is the next image. So this is a very important image. Here we can see this is the post-contrast image, this is the post-contrast MIP. This lesion is showing heterogeneous enhancement associated with this. So this is the beauty of MRI, that associated non-mass enhancement along with this solid mass-like enhancing lesion, this non-mass enhancement gives us a clue that there is associated next to it or associated component which may be probably pre-malignant, malignant, or maybe some DCIS or invasive component here. So these are the high risk factors. So besides in a papillary lesion on a core biopsy, if we are seeing associated non-mass enhancement, that makes it all the way more suspicious of having some invasive component alongside.
Right. So once we come across any papillary lesion or papillary suspicious papillary lesion on core needle biopsy, so what all additional information can we get from MRI? Can you just briefly tell us once again what all additional information can a surgeon get from MRI?
From MRI, I would like to say, ma'am, if the size of the lesion is more than 1 centimeter, along with the mass, if we are seeing non-mass enhancement in the regional or in a segmental distribution,
right,
that is a risk feature, and a lesion which is peripheral, which is like more than 3 centimeters, some literature says more than 2 centimeters from the nipple-areola complex, and the other risk factor that might upgrade, that might turn out to be invasive is if the biopsy was a 14-gauge biopsy, then at that time the sample, the amount is less. If the biopsy previous was a core, instead of a core biopsy, if it was web, then the risk of upgradation of invasiveness, it reduces. So seeing a lesion like this, it was a core needle biopsy at the to begin with. So, and second thing, there is non-mass enhancement associated with the lesion. Third thing, the age of the lady is more. Fourth thing, it is more than 3 centimeters from the nipple-areola complex. And next, it is more than 1 centimeter in size. So all these factors are compounding and pointing towards a more sinister diagnosis rather than just being a benign encapsulated papilloma. It might, in benign encapsulated carcinoma, it might have some invasive component, seeing the NME, non-mass enhancement around the lesion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ritu. I would now ask Dr. Anupama. Dr. Anupama?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you agree to the surgical plan which Dr. Seenu and Dr. Vedant has actually suggested?
Yes. So the question of breast conservation surgery or mastectomy will also have to be discussed with the patient.
Correct.
And depends on the patient's choice as well. Since she's an elderly lady, she might as well prefer to undergo a mastectomy.
But in fact, I wanted to ask about the axillary staging procedure.
So sentinel node biopsy is a definite in this because we have a suspicion for invasion, definitely.
Yeah. And are there any lesions which are probably suspicious papillary wherein you can omit, axillary stage, especially sentinel node biopsy? Will you be considering omission of sentinel node biopsy in any situation?
So basically, smaller papillary lesion, maybe less than 5 millimeters, central, no suspicious features on radiology, and core biopsy or a VAB giving us a better definitive diagnosis that it is purely intracystic or intraductal DCIS papillary. In those cases, yes, I would think about omitting sentinel node biopsy.
Okay. Dr. Vedant wanted to add something. Dr. Vedant?
It was just a comment. Anupama said elderly lady for a 60-year-old very soon, you know. I'm sure many ladies would object to it.
That's just a general comment, yeah.
So definitely this is what we did. She wanted conservation and we did round block and sentinel node biopsy for her. And this is her paraffin report. This has been reported as encapsulated papillary carcinoma with solid growth pattern. Now again, Dr. Ruchika, the previous was actually carcinoma with papillary solid growth pattern. This is encapsulated papillary carcinoma with solid growth pattern. So are these the same? We always get confused. Of course, now after Dr. Tanuja's talk, there is definitely some clarity. But as Dr. Goel has mentioned, we need to go back to the presentation again and again to really get hang of these papillary lesions again. But can you again reiterate on the pathology, whether it is the same as what it was reported in core needle biopsy?
Yes. So encapsulated papillary carcinomas, now they are considered, though they are low-grade indolent invasive carcinomas, but because they lack a myoepithelial layer, which will also be seen when we do myoepithelial markers on the core and now repeated on excision, they are considered as in situ lesions.
Okay.
They will behave as in situ, and therefore WHO puts them within the category of an in situ lesion, like it will behave like any other DCIS.
So
what is important in these lesions is, besides getting this encapsulated papillary carcinoma, there should be a thorough grossing along the adjacent areas to this tumor, that we are not missing on any invasive component. Like here in the radiology, they were saying that there were multiple lesions and all. So one should be careful that all those lesions have been sampled carefully, because if we get a diagnosis of only an encapsulated carcinoma, we label it as a PTIS, that is an in situ lesion.
Right.
But in case there is any invasive carcinoma, then your staging changes and management changes depending on that component. So here, yes, this is an encapsulated, so it's an in situ lesion.
So what pathological T category would
PTIS, just like an in situ, yeah, just like your DCIS, this would also be labeled as a PTIS, an in situ lesion.
Okay.
Vaishali, can I just make a comment, please?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. See, I think I'll just say it. Just let's go to the fundamentals, because a lot of people in this are surgeons.
Yes.
So please understand that when there is loss of myoepithelial cells, means it's an invasive cancer.
Right.
Now, solid papillary and encapsulated papillary are actually same lesions, except that solid papillary is neuroendocrine, whereas encapsulated papillary lacks neuroendocrine markers. So the thing is, why are these called as, they are kept between in situ and invasive? Technically, they are invasive cancers because biologically they don't have myoepithelial cells. So they should come under invasive. But because of the exceptional prognosis and because of the fact that they have this DCIS-like growth pattern, they have been included as behavior-wise in situ. Am I clear now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So you can avoid a sentinel node in the intraductal variant of solid papillary and encapsulated papillary if there is a surety that there is no associated in, so what happens, whatever tumor you're seeing now, imagine this is breaking out of the capsule that you're seeing.
Right.
So it's the same tumor, but it has now broken out of its solid, well-defined confines. Then we call it as invasive.
Right. So as Dr. Tanuja has rightly said, you can see that all the 4 nodes which were dissected were reported to be negative. So here I would like to ask Dr. Indu Bansal, what is her, opinion about adjuvant radiotherapy to this patient?
So basically, because this patient has undergone a breast conservation surgery, so radiation is definitely a must. And because this is, in a way, it's a DCIS, but with invasive behavior like DCIS, but invasive, and it is a breast conservation surgery. So definitely radiation only to the breast is needed. We don't need to treat any armpit or SCF in this case. It would be, and but the only difference I think is that you won't need a boost. So normally when we are giving radiation for a BCS, then we have to treat a whole breast plus we give a boost. But in this situation, I don't think she would need a boost. So it would.
What about the APBI? Will she be a candidate for APBI? Would she have been a candidate for APBI?
I think so. I think so, because this is, the tumor size is very, very, very small, and hypofractionated definitely.
Okay.
APBI, yes, it can be done. It can be offered to her because these tumors have a very slow and indolent behavior. They're usually I mean, ERPR positive that way. So
Yeah,
she,
they ERPR positive.
yeah, so they are usually ERPR positive, HER2/neu negative, and she has 7 to 8 mitotic index also. It's not very.
Right. Since we did not have intraoperative, APBI for her, so what would you use for APBI external beam? What would be
So
your
basically,
modality?
so basically the results with 3D CRT, they have not been very great. Although there is some data from Tata Memorial and other places where they are doing APBI with IMRT technique, which has shown good results.
Right.
So definitely interstitial based brachytherapy is always better. That has given the best results. But in this case, I think IMRT would be a decent option to
Right.
offer.
Vaishali, sorry, I'm butting in again.
No, ma'am, please.
So please understand that there is no radiation is to be used for intermediate and high grade tumors.
Right.
There is a subset of encapsulated papillary which is low nuclear grade, but the mitosis would not be as high as what Ruchika, I don't know whose report this is. But if there's absolutely, so we have my student did a thesis and couple of them, Dr. Rajiv Sarin is a radiation therapist in that.
Yes.
And couple of patients we discussed, and because of the mild ATPR, we've kept patients on observation and we have 6 or 7 years follow-up and nothing has happened to them. So
Okay.
low-grade encapsulated papillary can be observed with close follow-up, without radiation, because they behave like low-grade DCIs and they are strongly ERPR positive, so you just put them on anti-hormonal therapy.
Yeah.
So, of course, this is not a very common thing and there's no robust data, but that can be done.
But may I ask Dr. Tanuja, I'm sorry, I don't have a much experience on these encapsulated papillary carcinomas per se. But for DCIS, I mean, normally for DCIS, post BCS.
Low grade DCIs, what would you do? You would just give tamoxifen and keep them on observation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Same way.
We do. Ma'am, actually,
Vaishali,
report
Dr.
is from
Vaishali?
Max Hospital. Yes, sir.
And I just wanted to continue where Dr. Tanuja left.
Yes, sir.
Actually, there are 2 outcome studies currently available in the literature, the old outcome studies and the new outcome studies.
Right.
In the old outcome studies, they treated it as we are treating today, like they did breast conservation surgery, loco-regional surgery, and systemic therapy.
Yeah.
And then the new outcome studies, they did only local therapy alone, what Dr. Tanuja is telling, only local therapy, which is wide excision.
Okay.
And the results in the new studies, which though they say it is new, it is somewhere in, I think, 2015, about 230 patients, out of which 20 were solid cancers and rest of them were encapsulated papillary carcinomas. Only with local therapy alone, when they did it, that there was, I think, 1 case of axillary recurrence, and that's it. So currently what they're recommending is that, like, what is difficult for us as surgeons is to know whether there is an invasive component or a no invasive component. And according to them, all of these, the encysted papillary and the solid papillary carcinomas, they, though biologically what Dr. Tanuja said, loss of myoepithelial cells, most often or almost always they behave like in situ cancers.
Okay.
So how is it that we can make out that which of the patients has an invasive component and which of them do not have an invasive component?
So actually that was
Is
what...
it just lack of myoepithelial cells, or you should look at the basement membrane, or you should look at the amount of hyperplasia present? Like, how is it that the pathologist can tell us on a core biopsy that, okay, in this patient I'll do only a local therapy and in this patient I'll also do a biopsy? Because our patients don't agree to go to the operation theater again and again.
Correct.
So what we do is we look at the nuclear grade on core biopsy, and if we think it's high, we ask them for so encapsulated can be easily frozen because it's solid, so it is not friable like the normal one. And we often look, so there are cases in which we go back and frozen for an invasive, but of course frozen we don't submit the whole thing, we only give one section, we don't sweat too much. But the grade is very important. Again, I will reiterate that if it's a high grade, you have to treat it like any, these high grade DCIs. If it is a low grade, then you can spare radiotherapy and even sentinel node biopsy. So that only comes after final histopath report. That cannot be done on a core biopsy.
Right.
And none of them currently recommend actually systemic therapy at all, which is surprising. Like
I'm
even
going to come
most
to
of
that
them are luminal. Yeah.
So, before actually I move to Dr. Gopal, I would actually want to ask Dr. Sinu once again, considering her, if we go back to, the previous slides, considering her clinical presentation, age, her radiological, findings and her core needle biopsy report, would you have managed this case differently?
No, I think, I think I would have, if she would have wanted a breast conservation, then yes. But after listening to this webinar and reading the recent literature, I'm doubting whether what we are doing, are we overdoing it and over treating these
That's
patients?
what
That
actually,
is what is
yeah,
discussed actually.
right.
So after this webinar, I'm not sure.
Right. Dr. Gopal, considering her histopathology report and her immunohistochemistry, and after listening to Dr. Tanuja's, talk, what is your take on adjuvant system treatment for her?
So, adjuvant chemotherapy in papillary, tubular, and mucinous all are basically favorable histology.
Right.
Comes after T3 N1. N1 after more than 2 mm positive. So up to T3 less than 1 node, less than 2 mm positive, only adjuvant hormone therapy suffice.
Correct.
So because these are these are favorable histology, low risk of recurrence. So role of adjuvant chemotherapy is minimal, only in node positive or ERPR negative. They behave like just like IDs.
Correct. So I think I will conclude the first case here and move on to the second case.
Can I ask one question, Dr. Vishali? Just one minute.
Right.
My question is directly to Dr. Tanuja. Actually, I discussed that case with you as well. So there is one lady, Iraqi patient, who came to me with after a surgery for a pancreatic lesion, and she had undergone a Whipple's, and it came out to be a solid papillary carcinoma of the pancreas.
Right.
She did not have any staging workup in the form of PET before. She had a CT abdomen and a clinical examination, after which she came to us, and she had few features because of which she received radiation. But after 3 months' time, 3 to 6 months' time, she came with a breast lesion, maybe in 6 months' time. So maybe that was pre-existing and which was missed because no mammography was done for her. So I was just searching the literature, and she underwent investigations, and it came out to be solid papillary. She underwent a surgery for the breast lesion, and it came out to be solid papillary carcinoma of the breast as well. But her PET scan showed few lesions which were suspicious for bone metastasis, and they were so small that we could not do any biopsy to confirm whether they were metastatic or they were non-metastatic. So I just want to have Dr. Tanuja's opinion. Do they have they come across any cases with solid papillary carcinoma of breast with a coexistent pancreatic lesion? There is some literature on this.
Correct. So if I have, we don't have a case exactly like this, but solid papillary, the pattern tells you how it. We have around 100 odd, I think, nearly 100 solid papillary that we have reviewed. And in that, we've not got a bone metastasis. We've got metastasis, but remember the invasive pattern. If you remember my slides, I had shown you that there's an intraductal pattern. Then it slowly becomes invasive, and then it becomes mucinous. So if it's an invasive solid papillary, it will behave like IDC of any grade. Is that clear?
Correct.
So then if it's an invasive, then all of this is explainable. So what I'll do is just look at the pattern and say that this is an invasive solid papillary carcinoma, and then the bone metastasis is one of the commonest mode of metastasis.
So if we come across a case like this where we see solid papillary carcinoma of pancreas, then first should we also evaluate a breast? I mean, just a learning lesson.
No. So the pancreas might be a met from the solid papillary. So you need to compare histology for both.
No, as if this patient came
Dr. Indu, there is a
see a pancreas, and breast was diagnosed later.
So because I think the breast was a smaller lesion and the metastasis was more symptomatic.
Okay.
Maybe. I'm just speculating. I'm sorry.
Dr. Vedant, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so the pancreatic lesion would be a solid pseudopapillary carcinoma.
No,
And-
it was solid papillary.
Okay.
It was not pseudopapillary.
Okay. Okay.
I would like to add one thing here. These terms are synonymously used for pancreatic tumors. PEN is a very unusual tumor, but it is a common pancreatic tumor in young females. SPEN, otherwise solid papillary tumor of the pancreas, SPN, it is an unusual diagnosis, but in a young lady with a pancreatic mass, which is a very well-defined encapsulated mass, PEN is the first diagnosis. And only in 10 to 15% of the cases it has invasive or malignant potential. And most common site, like any pancreatic tumor, the most common site for metastasis is liver followed by omentum. Very less often it may goes to bone, but having a breast metastasis is little unusual. And we have seen almost 20-30 patients, I would say, in last 2-3 years of SPN, and we have never seen clinicians screening them with a mammography to find a concurrent lesion in breast. So maybe very, very unusual association, but routinely they are not screened. Routinely mammography is not done for these patients.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have to say this. PEM is totally different. It's not a carcinoma. Okay, PEM is a neuroendocrine tumor, benign most of the times. So I thought she said solid papillary carcinoma, so I got a little confused. PEM is totally different. It's an incidental finding in patients with cancer most of the time. So then these are two different things. I'm sorry, I thought it was solid papillary carcinoma in the pancreas and in the breast, and that's why I said they're associated.
Right.
PEM is often incidental.
Yeah, actually we are running short of time, so I'll quickly move on to the second case, and maybe we can take the discussion further later. So this is again a 67, and before we proceed with the case, I just wanted to tell you that this lady came to us in the early phases of COVID, wherein the apprehension about coming to the hospital was very, very high, and she wanted a quick treatment. So this is the caveat before presenting this case. She is a 67-year-old lady with lump in the breast, left breast of 2 months duration, no other symptoms, no nipple discharge. Clinically, a 2 centimeter lump at 9 o'clock position in the left breast. You can see the clinical picture. It was firm to in consistency, oval, and with well-defined margins. There were no other associated changes. Right breast and axilla was normal. So X-ray mammography was actually done where she was investigated previously. She had come from a public sector unit hospital and was referred for further management to us. So X-ray mammography showed two small, I'm going to show the X-ray mammography soon. 2 small lumps in the inferior medial quadrant of left breast, was labeled as Birad's 4. She had undergone FNAC twice and core needle biopsy twice in that same hospital, and it was inconclusive. She did not carry any slides or blocks. So this is her mammogram. Dr. Ritu, can you, considering her clinical presentation and look at mammography and tell us about what would you be labeling it as, or what will be your impression?
So that's the digital mammography bilateral MLO view, and here we can see 2 irregular masses in the inner quadrant, in the lower quadrant of the lower aspect of the left breast, but the masses of both of them, they have very well circumscribed margins. There is no associated architectural distortion, but yes, irregular mass in a lady who is like postmenopausal. Can I have the CC view,
Yes,
ma'am?
yes, I will show you the CC view as well. This
Yes.
is the CC view.
So here the 2 masses have superimposed, but in the CC zoomed in view, we can see some kind of angular margins here, though the margins are circumscribed, but they are somewhat angular. So we would like to go ahead with the tissue diagnosis here.
Right. Dr. Ruchika? Dr. Ruchika?
Yeah.
Yeah. So considering the fact that she has undergone FNAC twice and core needle biopsy also twice, what does that sound any alarm to you? Looking at the mammographic description and the presentation, clinical presentation.
Just like Dr. Tanuja said earlier, FNAC in papillary lesions would generally would not be of much value.
Right.
And obviously now that she's undergone core biopsy twice, I'm sure the patient would not like to undergo one, but if possible, a vacuum assisted biopsy here would have definitely been, would have led the surgeon to give a clear picture.
Right.
And vacuum-assisted biopsies to some extent can also categorize and definitely type what type of histological papillary lesion. I mean, your for example,
Can I add a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so firstly, FNAC was not warranted at all. And I would like to know if the core biopsy was image guided, or are these palpable masses and they were just, you know, blindly.
Palpable masses, and I was not very sure whether they were.
Okay. So that really brings me to the point that even palpable masses are served better if we do use ultrasound guidance, because oftentimes you don't know what you are biopsying, especially in these. If it is a cystic lesion, it's very easy to miss the solid component. If it's a necrotic lesion, you may just get the necrosis. So that's why image guidance is very important for biopsies to reduce scenarios like this.
Correct.
So that is what I wanted to add.
Right.
To this.
So here I would like to ask Dr. Sinu as to how would he, proceed further, because she has a time constraint. She doesn't want to stay in the hospital for long. So how would you proceed further? Dr. Sinu?
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to do an excision biopsy.
You would like to do an excision biopsy.
Yes.
Dr. Vedant, do you have any other comment?
So, as Dr. Smriti said, ideally, if she has not had a guided biopsy, we should attempt one guided biopsy. But if she has had two biopsies which are inconclusive, I think excision with frozen is a better option.
Correct. And Dr. Anupama?
Yes.
Yeah, so do you agree to Dr. Sinu to do an excision biopsy of this lump first?
Yes, excision with margins so that can double up as a BCS also.
Okay.
And I would advise a frozen, though my pathologist will not be very happy with the frozen for a papillary lesion, as we discussed earlier, the fallacies of frozen.
Right.
But for me as a surgeon, it is important to know whether this is an invasive carcinoma, should I do a sentinel node biopsy, and any further surgical steps. So yes, I would post her for a BCS excision biopsy with a frozen.
See, considering, only we do not have any pathological information so far. So considering only her clinical, examination findings and mammography, and considering the time factor, as Dr. Anupama has said, we went ahead because it was a papillary lesion we came to know later on. So we went ahead and did a wide local excision of the lump with frozen section and sentinel node biopsy. The frozen section was reported as papillary neoplasm, probably papillary DCIS. So my question to Dr. Vedant is, if you ignore the lower part, if this was her frozen section report, what would you do for axilla? Would you go ahead with sentinel node biopsy? What will be your take on what?
I will go ahead with sentinel node biopsy.
Can you elaborate on why would you go ahead?
See, the problem is we don't have a diagnosis pre-operatively on frozen. Dr. Tanuja very clearly said, and our pathologist and all of us have that experience. They are not comfortable reporting about the correct diagnosis of papillary lesions. So it is better to do a sentinel node biopsy at the same time. Also, because you don't want to subject her to multiple surgeries during COVID times, and otherwise also Indian patients, very difficult to convince them for another surgery. And they feel that you haven't done the right thing the first time. So that's, and cost issues are also there. So I would definitely do a sentinel node biopsy. If done well, you don't remove a lot of nodes. I don't think there is a problem post-operatively of lymphedema or any other thing.
Right. Dr. Sinu, do you differ on this, or would you still agree with this? What is your take? Dr. Sinu? So considering that, time, and she was already actually quite upset about the fact that despite multiple, biopsies, she could not get any, diagnosis, her age, and the peripherally located firm suspicious tumor, we went ahead and did a breast conservation surgery. It was done by matrix rotation, and at the same time we did frozen section and sentinel node biopsy. And for sentinel node biopsy, we have to do a pre-planning, inject and everything. So this was actually what was the best plan for her in that situation. So in case if she had come to us in a in a otherwise non-COVID era, probably we would have done something else. Probably we would have investigated her, did an ultrasound and looked at the ultrasound features, maybe did a VAB. Because Dr. Ritu, I wanted to ask, if it was reported as papilloma on ultrasound, would you have done VAB for a location like this, medially located tumor? Would VAB have been possible for her?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Even at medial location, unless it is close to nipple, it is away from nipple, we can also do some local, and we can some space between the chest wall and between the needle. So by injecting some local, we can create a space and we can do a vacuum assisted removal for the lump.
Right. So Dr. Ruchika, this is her actually paraffin section report.
Okay, so we see a very well delineated duct and a nice papillary neoplasm arising from it with a complex arborizing architecture, and you have nice broad fibrovascular pores. So this slide, it looks like a nice benign intraductal papilloma.
And you're absolutely right. It was actually reported as intraductal. There were two. So it was reported as intraductal papillomas. Now, my question to you is, this is such a peripherally located lesions. These are very peripherally located lesions. So isn't it unusual to find such papillomas in such terminal, ducts? Because the ducts in the periphery are very tiny or very small caliber. So can you get such lesions, big lesions in the periphery?
So you do have central papillomas and peripheral papillomas. The peripheral papillomas are generally multiple, associated with those blood thin discharge, and have a higher risk of malignant potential compared to the central ones.
Correct.
But they do occur and they're generally multiple.
Yeah. So this is what actually had been in our mind when we planned her surgery. And although it was definitely a surgical overtreatment for her because it was a benign lesion and her sentinel node biopsy was not of any use for her in terms of surgical staging, but this was actually the best possible scenario and management plan. I'm sure Dr. Vedant, Dr. Anupama and Dr. Sinu would agree.
Yes, I agree, Dr. Vaishali. In fact, even in non-COVID times, sometimes when patients insist on doing an excision directly after one or two inconclusive course, we do prepare for sentinel node, telling them that this may just go a waste.
Right. Yes. I think we are running short of time, so I would, Dr. Goel.
Yes, yeah, I am here.
So,
firstly, I must compliment for an excellent panel discussion, and really some interesting points have come forward. And I think this will sensitize all of us to the nitty-gritty or the complexity of these lesions, so that whenever we hear the word papillary, next time we will think twice before taking the next decision, try to get more information also. So I think we'll take some of the audience questions which are there. So first, some questions for Dr. Tanuja. Dr. Tanuja, you're there? Hello? Yes, ma'am. So first, one of the questions is how often papillary lesions are triple negative? So as we all know that majority are ER/PR positive, HER2 negative, but how often they can be triple negative?
So around 15% of papillary carcinomas, in fact, the high grade, so this papillary carcinomas, NOS and encapsulated papillary, the high grade tumors can be triple negative, and around 15% in our series, but they can be, it all depends on the nuclear grade.
So if we have a triple negative lesion, which is otherwise say encapsulated, the clinical behavior would still be like a in situ lesion?
No. It changes. So the triple negative behavior is associated with a little more poorer prognosis. So that's what. So with the biological markers, the situation changes. So if you have a triple negative encapsulated papillary carcinoma, you have to treat it like IDC of any other grade, because that's the behavior is going to be aggressive.
Okay. And then there was one question about Neuroendocrine, how often neuroendocrine markers may be positive in solid papillary carcinoma? So if you can add to that.
The definition of solid papillary includes neuroendocrine markers.
So it has to be always in there.
So focal, so it depends on, so age is important because solid papillaries do not occur in women less than 60 years of age. And so I showed you those 4 points. So age, a solid papillary pattern, even there is some peripheral palisading, and neuroendocrine markers somewhere in the tumor. It doesn't have to be strong and diffuse, but it depends on the nuclear grade.
Okay. And there was a question from Dr. Sinu about the role of HER2 new immunohistochemistry in solid papillary carcinoma. So would you like to make a comment about that?
We do ERPR and HER2 in all solid papillaries and encapsulated papillary carcinomas, because suppose I have an encapsulated papillary carcinoma and it turns out to be HER2 positive, then I will not call it an encapsulated papillary carcinoma.
Okay.
I'll call it a invasive papillary carcinoma. So all this has to be understood that
okay.
The biomarkers also have some role to play. So we've had a case recently where it was called treated like DCIS because it was, DCIS is also HER2 positive, and patient had a recurrence. And then they said that how it recurred if it's DCIS. So all these, please understand, encapsulated is an invasive tumor. It has limited dissemination potential.
Okay. And there was another question from Dr. Sinu about a papillary lesion in the axillary area. So if you do an axillary biopsy and you find a papillary lesion, so do you need to look for a second or a primary lesion within the breast?
So it's a very small percentage of papillomas are intranodal. So, there are 6, 7, 8 cases you get. So if you're very sure that on the breast imaging, depending on the patient's age, there's nothing in the breast and you get a node with a little papilloma inside. So these are basically the benign epithelial inclusions that are there in the node, they produce this papilloma. But these are small numbers. These are not high, but these are known.
No, but should we look for, madam, should we look for a primary in the breast when we see a...
Correct. You have to look and rule it out. So basically, if I'm very convinced that the nodal thing is benign, then I do a mammography or an MRI, whatever is required to do. Then, and if that doesn't show anything, then we treat it as a intranodal papilloma.
Okay. Then there was a question about the need for wide local excision if a patient has had vacuum assisted biopsy. So maybe we can ask our surgeons also to comment, Dr. Vedant, Dr. Sinu, Dr. Anupma.
So if it is not a benign lesion, we definitely need to go and widely excise because we don't know the margin status. Although Dr. Smriti showed a case which did not reveal any residual tumor, but then we have to go ahead and widely excise if it is a DCIS or an invasive tumor.
Sir, but there is no atypia, no DCIS, no invasive tumor.
Yeah, then we don't. That's what I said.
Yes.
Benign lesions we can leave, but anything which is DCIS or has invasive,
I would agree.
We have to excise widely, and that is why the importance of putting clip for all such lesions who are undergoing VAB.
But a large majority of patients do turn out to be benign papillomas and we are avoiding surgery in them. And most of the time it is curative as well. You have removed the whole lesion so the nipple discharge stops.
Yes.
So virtually you have, obviated the need for surgery in that subset of patients where there is no atypia and there is no malignancy.
Absolutely.
Can I ask Dr. Tanuja ma'am, if a VAB is done, does it interfere with your pathological assessment because the tissue is fragmented?
So we don't see too many. We only get referrals which are messed up. But I have had an instance where a VAB was done, and what happened was that there is something called as needle tract implantation.
Yes.
That when you do a VAB in a papilloma, it implants into it kinds of leaves fragments in the granulation tissue, and sometimes on radiology post surgery, these look like odd lesions and they are biopsied and they end up being called as invasive or some funny things. So I have had only one case where so be very careful after VAB assisted excisions, because you may have needle tract implantations are more common with MAB. I don't know, I have very little experience, but that's what the thing. Most important, as Vedant has already said, once you have a VAB excision, you have to have a wide margin and excise it. Thankfully, if it's a lesion is benign, you don't get anything back. But if there is some odd thing, you always get tumor in the rest of the thing. So I think what you get on the VAB decides on whether you go back and re-excise. So if you have an atypical or a carcinoma on a VAP, you need to go back and do the margins as Vedant has already told.
Arun, I want to ask same question to Smriti.
Yeah.
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 Dr. Smriti,
yeah,
if
would
we
you
do
like
a core
to?
biopsy followed by MRI, are you comfortable in interpreting it? After a core biopsy and it is equivocal, but we want another investigation, we do MRI.
Yes, we generally do MRI right after the core biopsy. In fact, sooner it is done, better it is, because there are not much inflammatory changes, and you can make out the hemorrhage separate from the enhancing tumor. So biopsy, now we don't wait to do a biopsy. Earlier on it used to be the said thing that first do an MRI, only then a biopsy. But I do not do that for scheduling. It's not hard.
Thank you.
Okay, I think then we would sort of, the questions are over here. If any of the panelists or our faculty, Dr. Tanuja, Dr. Smriti, if there's any other comment you would like to make, then I would welcome such comments.
Actually, I think we should ask one question about multiple papillomas.
Okay.
Open to all of you. In fact, I was actually going to present another case, but for sure, time constraints, we are not able to. This lady again was an 60-year-old lady presented with pathological copious blood stain discharge, a single duct. And on imaging, she was found to have multiple papillomas. Even the peripheral, ducts were actually showing multiple small papillomas. So the question was how to obtain a pre-operative biopsy and how to go ahead with this kind of a case. She had small breasts. She was 60-year with pathological kind of discharge, blood stain, copious, and multiple papillomas even in the peripheral ducts.
So Smriti, I actually, the one case that I deleted one of the cases. So it's very common in Tata, because I think these cases get missed, or these are the follow-up preventive oncology cases that come. There's a lot of gray zone here, in the sense that I remember, but importance is to thoroughly, so first we probably end up doing a microducectomy, and in that microducectomy we end up with some atypia or something, and that makes us review the rest of the breast. And once or twice we actually, because of a second surgery also having something, like low-grade DCIS, the patient finally opts for mastectomy. So it is a chronic, long-drawn process. Radiology has a big role, because radiologists can help you in, picking up lesions.
I would say that multiple papillary lesions is any radiologist's nightmare.
And even surgeon's nightmare.
Nightmare, because you don't know, which one of them is the problematic one.
Yes.
And we try hard with every thing we have, every tool we have in our armamentarium, and the best of that is high resolution ultrasound, where I would like to see if there any margins are irregular, if I can see any extraductal extent, and I would also do an MRI in such a patient, so that I am sure that I am targeting at least the most suspicious one and not missing out. And even after, if I have come up with a negative biopsy, I would keep the patient on follow-up.
So the thing is, it also depends on the patient a lot, because if the patient is apprehensive, then you start doing the surgical thing. I've seen so many patients, and remember all these are associated with low-grade lesions. So even if she ends up with an invasive cancer, it's going to be a ER/PR positive cancer.
I will just share a case with you people. A very high-profile lady came to us with axillary lymphadenopathy, and that turned out to show papillary tumor. So going back to the history, she had undergone a core needle biopsy, which was duct papilloma, benign papilloma, 3 years back, and then she was lost to follow up, and now she had come with metastatic nodes. So that is what it is. And when we did the imaging now, there were multiple papillary lesions in both breasts. So she was so psyched out that she underwent bilateral mastectomy. So these papillary lesions can be a nightmare when they are multiple. And even if you have a papilloma as a diagnosis, follow up at least for 5 years has become my rule.
So what will be your imaging follow-up? How frequently would you do imaging? Not imaging.
Yes. If there are multiple papillomas, I would like to do a 6-monthly ultrasound at least for 1 year, and then I would go to a 1-year follow-up.
Okay. Yes, Dr.
So I would just like to say actually, Dr. Vaishali, that because our patients don't really come for follow-ups, and this is what happened with Dr. Smriti's case also. So, you know, surgical excision for a proved papilloma or a papillary lesion, surgical excision, I think is really preferable. I mean, to keep them on follow-up when they might not turn up is a little risky.
That multiple papillomas, you know, the all entire duct system was actually having multiple papillomas. So
and surgery will also cure the symptoms. See, she comes with a nipple discharge. You have to treat her for that too.
Correct. So we ended up doing a mastectomy for her. Even without a preoperative diagnosis, she insisted on getting rid of her breast. And we found one small focus of low-grade DCIS. And the rest were all benign papillomas. But the patient is not complaining. She's happy.
I think Dr. Vedant and Dr. Rajiv want to make a comment. So Dr. Vedant and Dr. Rajiv.
So I also wanted to share a patient's case. This was around 7 years ago. Young lady had bilateral lesions. One side on frozen was told as clearly invasive, and the other side they said looks like DCIS. They were non-committal, but they did tell me on phone it is DCIS at least. So one side I did a mastectomy. It was a central lesion and large area involved. But the other side I didn't have the heart to do anything, and thankfully I did not do it. Even the IDC which was reported on frozen was finally on a review by another pathologist was reported as a florid papillomatosis. And the other side also turned out to be papillomatosis with a margin positive, which is expected. And she is still under follow-up now, 7 years, doing well. They haven't progressed. So, you know, both sides managed a little differently.
Right.
Dr. Rajiv.
Papillomatosis is actually a nightmare, whether it is limited to quadrant or limited to the whole breast. Because the incidence of ADH varies up to the 43% or 45% in various literature, and incidence of DCIS has been reported anything between 15% to 30%.
That's right.
I think if there is a multiple papillomatosis limited to a quadrant, an excision is warranted. If it is spread over the whole breast, I think we should discuss the patient with the treatment. And if the patient is not willing to take future risk, I think a simple mastectomy may be an answer. But that depends upon the proper discussion with the patient and then planning the treatment, as Vaishali did in her case, where there was no malignancy, but the patient was reasonably satisfied after the surgery.
So we did a skin sparing mastectomy. Nipple areola complex was actually sacrificed and did a primary reconstruction for her. But we found a very small focus of low-grade DCIS in that case.
So just to say, Vaishali, we had some doctors with this kind of issues and they are very conscientious. So they agree to follow up. And I had a lady when I joined way back in 2000 early. Yes. And that time I called it, you know, low grade or something. And that time the terminologies were not so developed. Today we have a good idea. So on retrospect, I think it was an encapsulated papillary carcinoma. And but whatever it was DCIS like, so she had an excision and she was put on tamoxifen. So after a long time, she has now developed a grade 1 cancer after some 20 years. So the thing is, but she was on follow-up. So, and still you won't believe it that till today, she requires only tamoxifen because she was picked up earlier and, you know, so I think it all depends on the patient dynamics. Instead of, you know, if patient wants mastectomy, I think it's easier for all of us. But if the patient is agreeing for follow-up and, you know, she's not panicking, I think it's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There's an observation which I was discussing with Dr. Vaishali. We tend to sort of see more of papillary lesions nowadays in last couple of years. So maybe Dr. Tanuja and all can say whether it is an actual increase, it is a change in the pathologist perspective, or a lot of women are having maybe a lot of imaging and that is why we are picking up these lesions.
Actually, awareness I think is increasing. Because, you know, we had the awareness of people, so, you know, nipple discharges and all, people are coming more easily. Earlier, I think women ignored them. Now they are more conscientious, and plus the whole biology is that now, you know, people are living longer. So we've got like, I've got 99-year-old with papillary carcinoma. So all that is happening. So I think it will increase.
Dr. Anupma, you want to make a comment on this?
No, even I feel the same. What she said, there are multiple reasons for this increase. I mean, we are diagnosing more, patients are becoming more aware, pathologists are looking more intensively into these papillary lesions. So yes, everything contributes to an increase in papillary lesions.
Okay.
I think the ultrasound has made a lot of difference in diagnosing.
Yes.
A good quality ultrasound. So people like Smriti Hari has made a lot of difference in diagnosing the papillary cancer.
No, I think definitely the focus on breast radiology, it has increased significantly. A lot of radiologists are now focusing on breast radiology, high quality, high frequency ultrasound machines. And definitely, I think women coming more frequently for imaging for mild symptoms. So all that has, I believe, made a big difference. So I think since we are already have overshot quite a lot, so I would like to call it a day. And really a great bundle of thanks to Dr. Tanuja, Dr. Smriti, all the panelists, Dr. Seenu, Dr. Vedant, Dr. Anupma, Dr. Ruchika, Dr. Ritu Verma, Dr. Gopal, Dr. Indu Bansal, and all the audience. And I would like to say sorry, there was some glitch in the beginning when the YouTube live stream started a little late. And since it was our first program, we had some issues with coordination. We would try to do a better job. Thanks a lot again. Wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Goel. Thank you, Vaishali.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah. Good night. Bye.